If you're like me, there's little in a gaming experience that hypes you up quite like the long-anticipated boss battle. There's nothing like a showdown against a foe 10 times the strength of those you've slain before, which is why I felt thriving in the recent resurgence of the boss rush genre. Games like Cuphead and Sekiro have the formula of a continuing tier of showdowns to a science, but I'd argue games like these owe their pedigree and style to what some consider just a silver tier Nintendo franchise, Punch-Out! Punch-Out was famous for a lot of years for its colorful cast and trial-and-error style, but I'd argue that with its masterful remaster on the Nintendo Wii, Punch-Out not only maximized these qualities, but eclipsed into masterful storytelling weaved into a simply excellent video game. The premise of Punch-Out is pretty straightforward. You play as the apprentice of Doc Lewis, Little Mac, who intends to become the champion of the World Video Boxing Association, where the best and brightest from all over the world gather to test their boxing mettle. As Little Mac, you face increasingly skilled and daunting boxers through the minor, major, and world circuit, as you bruise faces as well as egos on your way to the top. It's a story as old as time, but brought to a cartoonish exaggeration, which I say with the most possible love. Little Mac, a young man of just 5 feet and 7 inches tall, starts at the bottom and climbs up the ladder on his way to the championship belt. This is the packaging for what is ultimately a story of a modern-day David overcoming a gauntlet of monumental Goliaths. The first lesson any player of Punch-Out quickly learns is that playing offensively will get you very little progress. As Little Mac, you must use your speed and reading of foes to dodge and weave around their massive assaults, exploiting their openings and chipping away at their composure gradually. Note that Little Mac can only deal damage in many, many punches, what his hulking opposition can do in just one. As he beats down greater and greater odds, Little Mac proves his skill and tenacity, despite his stature, is truly the ultimate underdog story. The character design and hierarchy of the opponents of Punch-Out is masterful, immediately establishing the professional nature of a boxer, which is read by their place within Little Mac's journey. From Disco Kid, who clearly cares more about showing off than actually growing stronger, is intuitively an early foe in Mac's circuit of opponents before we move on to the more disciplined major circuit opponents, up until the seemingly unstoppable titans of the world circuit. Punch-Out gives a glimpse of a boxer's life in a short bit of time. You learn their vocation outside of boxing, their training regimen, and motivation. It's in this way that Punch-Out creates a distinct feeling of sportsmanship. Besides the rare exception that proves the rule, it's not often that a boxer is painted as a heel or outright a bad guy. You're both just athletes competing. And yet the peak your opponent represents, as well as raw challenge they give you, makes them feel more like a personal foe than a majority of true video game villains I've encountered. Playing Punch-Out means trying over and over and over again when a foe seems unstoppable. Every opponent will teach you a mechanic or have a gimmick you need to pin down to master this obstacle. You will not defeat Bear Hugger by fighting him the same way you did Piston Hondo. This builds an incredibly interesting relationship with each opponent, as you may spend hours if not days getting to know an opponent once you get to the higher difficulties. It creates a begrudging respect for your foe, a burning desire to win, and in the end, a peerless high from finally figuring out how to outdo your rival. And yet, waiting behind them is only an even stronger one. Considering how long you can be stuck trying to defeat an opponent, it's a good thing they're animated with the utmost care and personality. We have here a diverse and fascinating cast, despite many fighters from all over the world speaking their own native language with no subtitles present. I always felt there was a very clear subtext to what the boxers were taunting with, to the point that I could hear their voices and intentions clearly in my head. The fighters are bombastic, hilarious, and terrifying, and their massive personalities bleed through their every move and gesture. The characters' personalities even impact the flow of battle itself, such as when you incur the wrath of the vain Don Flamenco by knocking off his hairpiece, or by taking the risk of knocking down Bald Bull in a single punch when he makes himself vulnerable for just a brief moment during his strongest assault, the Bull Charge. No two fights are identical, because the personalities of each fighter flavor each battle so significantly and distinctly. All of this culminates in Little Mac making it to the end of the world circuit, where the only thing standing between himself and the champion's belt is the towering world victor, Mr. Sandman. Little Mac watches Sandman walk down a glimmering staircase toward him, like a titan descending from the heavens, to give Little Mac his fair shot at the coveted #1 spot. You, as the player, have to use everything you've learned thus far to tackle this Herculean task, and with enough effort and concentration, Little Mac can win, and yet, his journey there is far from over. The we-imagining of Punch-Out asks an incredibly important question that none of its predecessors did, one that pushed this game far beyond what was expected, that being what Little Mac did once he became champion, which is answered by the second campaign, Title Defense, in which Little Mac holds the belt and every boxer you fought before wants the same shot at glory you had, only this time with new training and tools at their repertoire. It's here that Punch-Out makes the brilliant move of spinning the paradigm of the game, in which the fighters who were once the invincible Goliaths are now the Davids wanting to knock you off your throne. The time you spent mastering ducking to avoid Bear Hugger's strongest moves, Bear Hugger spent training in the Rockies to take you down. The effort you expended timing Super Macho Man's clothesline punches, he spent building conviction and mass to get back at you. And all of a sudden, the affinity for these opponents grows even further. They were infectious and memorable in the first place, but now you know what it's like to be them and have an opponent they can't stop. You can't say you regret beating them, and yet it's hard not to feel for them as their loss to Little Mac leaves many of them disillusioned and dejected, and it's harder not to admire the lengths they take to get stronger and defeat you. It's through this insanely cohesive storytelling that I felt more respect for many of the boxers of Punch-Out than I have for most opponents in any given video games, virtual or otherwise. It all comes to a head when Mr. Sandman, resolved to reclaim his title and sporting a new look to do so, challenges you and watches you come down from the very same stairs he did when you fought him, and he feels the very same conviction you did when you fought him all that time ago, bringing the story full circle. Punch-Out not only puts you through one of the most rigorous and continually colorful boss rushes ever, but it turns the table and makes you the boss rush. An underdog story is so rarely simply that, and Punch-Out does a masterful job showing you life climbing to the top and being on top as you develop a noted kinship with everyone you punch to the mat along the way. And I've yet to find a game that does this in such strong suit.